good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Building the Black Educator Pipeline podcast. I am your host, Shana Terrell, educator activist dedicated to the lifelong struggle of freedom and liberation for her people. So I want to shout out Happy Black History Month to all of you celebrating the good times. Come on, let them roll. So as we know, this is the month where we celebrate Black excellence and celebrate Black accomplishments, past, present, and future. But if you didn't catch my episode last week with my Baba, Dr. Greg Carr, check it out. So though the world celebrates us this month, we as a people know that Black History Month is a vibe that lasts 365 days of the year. Get into it, okay? And as always, shout out to Citizens Ed and the Center for Black Educator Development for creating this platform where we can talk to real people in the real struggle, doing the real work. Today's theme is building the Black educator pipeline and the science of learning. So come and get these lessons, y'all. I'll be connecting with my guests today about building students' learning capacity, the science of learning, and literacy being the epicenter of equity. So let me introduce today's guest. Ms. Zaretta Hammond is a national consultant and author of Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain, promoting authentic engagement and rigor and culturally linguistic diverse students. She's a former high school and community college expository writing instructor. The past 20 years, she has supported schools and other institutions in deepening their understanding and application of culturally responsive practices. She currently runs the Culturally Responsive Education by Design online PLC, a 6-month intensive inquiry-based professional learning experience to build instructional capacity to use culturally responsive tools and practice effectively. Ms. Hammond is a strong literacy advocate who sits on the board of trustees for the Center for Collaborative Classrooms. She's also a member of the advisory board for the Consortium of Reading and Education. So please welcome my guest, everybody, Miss Zaretta Hammond. Hey.
Hey.
How are you?
I am good. It's always good to celebrate Black excellence and Black History Month with talking about how we continue to build on that legacy of Black excellence, because it ain't new. We've been at it for a long time. And you know what? My Aunt Earl just had her 101st birthday yesterday.
Aunt Earl, shout out to you. 101. That's a good long life. Okay.
That's a good long life.
A good long life. But no, we thank you for joining us. And as always, I wanted to give the happy shout out for Black History Month. But we do this 365 days of the year, honey. So you are here, just another guest, giving us your tools, dropping your knowledge, and ready for the people. But we appreciate you being here with us today.
Absolutely.
So generally how we like to start off, we're a little nosy out here about education, but in general, we love for people to share their stories, how they entered the journey of education and what inspired you to be an educator. It's helpful for our people out there to see your path.
Yeah, I am happy to share that. And for those that have read the book, know a little bit about that, but it has been a very indirect way in which I came to education. And it started in San Francisco. My grandparents came out to San Francisco in 1940, last wave of that Black migration. My grandmother gone to the 3rd grade. She could not read or write. I remember her learning to sign her name when she was about 70 years old. I remember sitting at the table watching her and her getting excited about having learned her letters and then writing her name in cursive. My grandfather went to the 6th grade. So all of that in many ways radicalized my mother. She was a teen parent, but she always had a passion for education, even though she'd only gone to high school. Later on, she went and got her AA at City College of San Francisco. So she always, though, valued learning over education. It wasn't about the letters behind your name. It was about your ability to liberate yourself through the information. And what really brought me into that was she was a teen parent, 3 kids before she was 22, ended up on welfare. And she started to participate in what they call the CETA program, right? Welfare to Work program. Back in the
Okay.
day, they were still at it today.
Yep.
But the reality was she got a job as a library technician in the public libraries. Her job was to help check books out, shelve them. And my after school program was to go down to Mama's branch and she'd pile a table full of books. And she said, when you hit the table, after looking and reading the books, it's time for us to go. And I remember the day that I had read everything in the children's section and all the new incoming books. And I went up to her at the circulation desk and I said, Mom, can I go to the adult section? And she gave me that serious side eye, like, I know what's over there. Um, can you go over there? Is that safe for your little brain? And she
Mm.
said, yes. And wow, what I learned. And the ability to take in new information. She always made sure we were reading and learned to read. And that just radicalized me. Seeing what my grandparents' life was like. My grandmother was a maid. My grandfather had a strong back. He was a strong man and he worked as a longshoreman until he couldn't work anymore. Versus, the life of the mind and the melding of the two. And so that
Mhm.
was my path, and literacy was my mission. And I worked as a writing tutor. I worked at UC Berkeley, and I started to see Black and brown kids coming through, not being able to stay in the university because they didn't have strong writing skills.
Mhm.
So I made that my mission, building capacity around literacy, writing, reading for purpose, expository reading so that we're writing about stuff, not just creative writing, right? So all of that to say that that was a long journey to just really digging in as an educator. Eventually went back, got my credential, my master's, and started teaching. Eventually came out of the classroom to start working in supporting teachers, teacher education. I probably would have been called an instructional coach back in the day, but we didn't have
Okay.
that
Mhm.
label. But that's been my trajectory. And I still believe reading is the epicenter of equity. So that regardless of what we're doing, we cannot ignore that. The numbers tell us that when we look at the success or the failure of our children of color in schools.
We're definitely going to get into that. And it looks like, that's what like you were driven by. But what's so amazing about what your mother did, she didn't limit you. When you asked, Mommy, can I go over to that other side and dig into these other books? She said, go ahead and do that. Like she
That's
didn't
right.
limit you and she believed in you. And I think that's so awesome for
Yeah,
teachers and for parents out here to hear. Like we have our own expectations of what we think children can achieve,
that's
but
right.
pushing children beyond limits or allowing them to test the limits that they want to could have great outcomes. So I
Here's the
think
thing that I would
that's
add to that too
amazing.
is, she understood the liberatory nature of education. So in addition to just wanting support, she also knew you need to free your mind and
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
have to be able to have those tools. And the way you're going to do that is build your background knowledge. In addition, feeding me, the core Black history, right?
Hmm.
So, uh, John Henry Clark,
Hmm.
Asa Hilliard, right?
Yep.
Exposing me to those, taking me out on freedom marches in the early 60s. I have a picture up on my Instagram feed that has me in newspaper clip where they caught us, my brother, my sister, myself, marching. So she had this very liberatory, revolutionary idea of the role education played. She wasn't heavy handed with it, kind of like as a message, but she definitely said, no, the way to liberation is for you to know stuff because they can't, nobody ever take that away
Take that
from you.
from you. And the experience, right? Allowing the experience to be a part of the exposure and not just you need to read this book and study this. Like you
Right.
need to have this experience. And of course, you bring up the excellent points of being able to access that background knowledge, right?
Right.
Which most of us get through the experience and not just the learning in the classroom. So I think that's amazing. And a great journey. So in many ways, your mother's experience, especially working as a librarian, put you on that path to education and understanding how important and crucial literacy is
Right.
to our young people. But what I want to get into first, right? Because this is always probably a burning question when folks are talking to you. And it's really about what is culturally responsive teaching, right? Like you wrote a phenomenal book, Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain. But we know that people have taken, chopped up, clipped up, rewound, remixed what culturally responsive teaching is. But I would love to hear from you. What is culturally responsive teaching?
Yeah, I want to be able to help people go to the sources, right? And the primary source for that is for the person who coined the term, Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings. And she
Yes.
points out three things, right? She points out it's about relational belonging, having places where students feel they can be their full self, and having relevant content, but also having the opportunity to develop that academic and reclaim that academic prowess. And she does that in some interesting ways, definitely in The Dreamkeeper. But when you look and couple that text with the education debt, that she really talks about inequity by design, how schools, our schools in America, were born of apartheid. So the reality is folks used, reading to underdeveloped students'
Yes.
cognitive capacity. So when she talks about this education debt, that's what she's talking about. And therefore, culturally responsive teaching, this idea of creating places that feel intellectually safe and foster sense of belonging because it's culturally congruent. Your brain is calm and ready.
Mm-hmm.
And that sense of academic prowess, building student capacity by giving them work worth doing and building their capacity to do it, is really important. I feel like the thing that people are doing is treating culturally responsive teaching, the concept of culturally responsive teaching, like gluten-free. They put that issue on everything. And you go in the supermarket and, meat gluten-free. Well, meat never had gluten. Why are we putting that on there? And we're doing the same thing with culturally responsive. You see the big publishers in education. Oh, this is culturally responsive. Well, you would know culturally responsive if it hit you upside the head. What are you putting it on there for? And what happens is it lulls people into believing, oh, because I do that, I am.
I am.
And this is a misconception, and it's misdirection too. It's a distraction, it's misdirection. It's designed to make you think you are, while students languish and
Suffer.
continue to suffer in the way of education underdevelopment. And so culturally responsive teaching is really multifaceted. It's an algorithm where all these things have to come together. And, unfortunately, people take one piece of it and they narrow it to relationships. It's about relationships. And then they, hook it to growth mindset. And now we're coming at it with this deficit ideology that somehow it's a treatment to fix broken kids,
Mm.
right? Or it's some kind of magic trick to increase engagement and motivation, as if we're not motivated. Education has always been our liberatory path. So this idea that somehow we're broken when y'all broke us, when
Right.
Patina Love really lifts this up, and the idea of the America loves to talk about the gap when what they don't talk about is they created the gap.
They created the gap. I was just
So
thinking that when you were talking about how this concept of culturally responsive teaching like leads us down the path of continuing to have Black children suffer. So when we talk about these gaps, right?
yeah.
The achievement gap, the opportunity gap, when education is designed to create these gaps or the access gaps. You're not teaching children how to read to be able to access anything.
Well, and here's the distraction. So we're all over here talking about culturally responsive teaching in very superficial ways when reading is the epicenter of equity. So
Yep.
the same people who are trying to make culturally responsive lessons are ignoring the fact that their children are 2 or 3 grade levels behind. And now we're talking about putting grade level text in front of them, and that is the important thing. And then what we end up doing is over scaffolding instruction. So
Mhm.
over scaffolding instruction is the epitome of inequity by design, because what you're
Mhm.
doing is you're doing the heavy cognitive work for the student. So when you stop over scaffolding, the student cannot do that work alone. So
Yep.
what Dr. Ladson-Billings talks about when she talks about academic prowess is that piece. How are we helping students build their capacity to be cognitively independent learners, not just compliant learners.
Mhm.
Right? There's a pedagogy of compliance out here that we now have kind of wrapped around with the cloak of culturally responsive. So,
Yes.
you can't have it both ways, right?
Talk about
Liberation
that.
of a child's learning spirit means it's going to get creative and chaotic. And as educators, our job is to know how to hold that space for them to engage in productive struggle and find their path as learners. So
Yes. Can
I
we
could
can
go
we
on and on.
I know. Can we dig into something you said though?
Mhm.
I really want to dig into the pedagogy of compliance.
Oh, girl, don't even
'Cause
get me started on that.
listen, I just don't want that to go over folks' head and what that means. Because again, I think when we talk in terms of compliance, a lot of attention is given to behavior and discipline when we're talking about a culture of compliance. But there's a strong culture of compliance that exists in academics, which is also detrimental to Black children. But I don't
That's
think that gets lifted up enough
it
at
doesn't.
all. So I
It
would like
does.
I think it's terrible. Meaning, when we talk about academics and when you're talking about over scaffolding and you know how people set up their lesson plans, I do, we do, you do, but the cognitive load is mostly put on the teacher and not on the children to actually think and push themselves and to explore and be okay with failing and trying again, all those things that build capacity for the brain, all those things that go into scientifically, and we'll get into that too, on how we're actually learning or how the brains learn are absent um, in classrooms that are predominantly Black and Latinx. And students are doing what they are told academically, right? They're not in charge of their own learning tools. They're doing what they're told. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that pedagogy of compliance, because I think we don't talk about that enough and how it exists loudly in education.
Yeah, it's actually our go-to mode. And it's so common that we don't even recognize it. And one of the things that I think got really ignored in TNTP's report, The Opportunity Myth,
Hmm.
is this very fact. The very first figure in there really talks about the data on students completing assignments. The
Hmm.
first statistic is 71% of students complete their assignments uh, um, based on this survey of teachers and classroom assignments. But only 17%, when we look at those uh, that completed the assignments, only 17% actually hit the standard. So what it tells us is they're turning in work, but the work is subpar. And what
Yep.
we're favoring is them turning in the work. We penalize
Hmm.
them if they don't. We cajole them. So students are actually socialized from kindergarten to actually be compliant. The blacker and browner, right? The heavier that accent, the mother tongue is not English, indigenous status. No, we know you are actually going to start to get fed a pedagogy of compliance, regardless
Compliance.
of what people say. All you need to do is step in the classroom and look at it,
Yep.
right? And it's right in front of us. And what we do is we try to level up the compliance to make it look like it's active. So we
Yep.
have active learning. We have that we turn and talk. Turn and talk to your partner for 5 minutes. Like, what 5 minutes gonna do for talking? And then kids, put a boom mic in that and see what they talking about. The reality is we are not leveraging the spaces to help students become powerful learners. So I do think that piece of it in terms of compliance. There's some other things I talk about in terms of that. I'm actually writing my second book, and will really go into that pedagogy of compliance as opposed to developing cognitively independent learners, because we don't know how to do that. And we don't center information processing as the capacity to develop. And we keep
Hmm.
talking about it as critical thinking. Well, critical thinking is important, but if you don't know how to process information, you can't even do critical thinking.
Critical
So
thinking.
there's ways in which we keep reducing it and oversimplifying, and again then fit it into the pedagogy of compliance. I just need you to do what I say, not to think for yourself.
Yes, or I just need you to hand in this work and I'll pass you if you do the work. But
That's
whether
right.
you understand the work or not, it makes no difference, which is why you're going to pass on from grade to grade, not knowing how to read or not being on grade level.
And
Um,
everybody's okay with it. Every
yep.
adult looks and sees their school data. Same kids on the bottom, same kids are succeeding at the top. And this goes on for years, if not decades, in a school district or in a particular neighborhood school, and nobody's hair is on fire.
Yes. And so much so, right, that when you begin to question those things, right? So when you're dealing with folks who are liberatory educators, or you're dealing with parents who are clear on liberatory education, or just want to demand more for their child, right? Because parents are involved too. So they're at home like, it doesn't really seem like you're getting this. And if you're getting
Right.
this, I don't understand how you got an 80 in so-and-so's class and you don't get the work. When parents begin to question, it's something wrong with you because you want to
Yeah.
know if your
Yeah.
child on grade level, you
That's right.
know?
Let's just stay with the parents. And one of the things, and the number one thing, right? If you're an equity centered educator, number one thing you can check is what's your relationship like to parents. So let's just start there. Parents are child's first teacher. They're not on the sideline, just kind of involved, and we don't give them the due respect.
At
Again, that
all.
that deficit ideology about Black, Brown, Indigenous folk and their level of intelligence gets communicated in how we talk to parents. Just go in, start recording parent teacher conferences, interactions at the front desk, and you'll start to see how those narratives are playing out in actions, in policy, in practice. So we keep marginalizing parents and telling them, oh, your job is to come to the parent teacher conference so I can tell you something. Well, the minute
Yes.
you start off like that, and you're not starting off with a circle to honor the knowledge that they're bringing in, the honoring the fact that their child is walking and talking and coming to school ready to learn. Now, there's babies kids out there, if you're old enough to know what that is, you are. And if not, Google that. But the reality is, most children are coming ready and eager. Brains are
Baby kids
open.
are
That
not the
is what,
majority.
that's right.
Yes.
That's what our brains do. But we don't treat parents like they have done that job and that they are the first teachers.
Nope. No respect. And I've said that many times as a K-12, administrator. Parents are walking into buildings that they don't feel welcomed in, where they don't feel a part of the team. Why am I
Hmm.
coming? We could talk on the phone. You know how we always had these memes like that could have been an email? This could have been a phone call. Child, I got to get off work early and get the rest of the kids hustle, whatever, for you to come and tell me about my child instead of treating me like a
But
partner.
let's even start with that. To treat someone like a partner, we know the first thing you do is you start to build rapport. You're not
Yes.
bringing no bad news. You're not trying to bring no directives. You, hey, how are you? Tell me
Yes.
about you. What's up? What's up? And you are trying to build that relationship in an authentic way, not white savior like. Because
Hmm.
here's the thing about it, that whole white savior mentality is ensconced in other places and being enacted by people of color. So, we got to interrupt what we are accepting in our own teacher education as the way to go. So someone just put in the comment, I'm reading the scroll while I can, that the
Yes. Yes.
someone said, the pedagogy of compliance looks good when you have a class of 35.
Hmm.
But the pedagogy of compliance only looks good if you've not actually been doing that instructional work to build powerful brains. If you
Yes.
haven't put the structures in place where students know how to work in a maker space or to move from one a routine or station to another, where they are being independent learners. Both of my kids were Montessori kids from 3.
Mm.
They actually cultivate and develop students to be independent in their ability to move around a classroom setting without being disruptive and not having to be micromanaged by the teacher. When the teacher does that, she's trying to hold the whole class. I'm trying to hold 35. So now I'm going to double down. This ain't prison, it's a learning space. We ain't trying to control nothing.
Holy black body. That's
Unleash your
right.
mind.
Yes.
Don't
Yes.
get me started on that.
No, get started on it.
Stay wound up. I don't even need a
You're like,
question.
because I stay ready, so I don't have to get ready. Listen, I am for
Right.
it. One of the key things I think we should censor in this conversation, because it's another thing that doesn't get talked about enough in education, is the actual science of learning. I think
Yes.
that when people hear buzzwords, they become buzzwords. That's not how they started. But when we talk about culturally responsive teaching and how you're saying they put that issue on everything, then it becomes a buzzword, right? Like, oh, if I get this book because it's culturally responsive, if I get this, it's the buzzword. And
Yeah.
then people also drown out the noise of science, right? That actually works to these superficial kind of interactions that they again sprinkle in a lesson Okay, so I'm going to replace this white person with this black person in the lesson. And that makes my lesson culturally responsive. But using no scientific techniques on how the brain works and how children actually and people actually learn. So I would
That's
love to hear, what are the key elements of the science of learning?
Yeah, I think this is so important that you raise this because we have fallen into this brain-based learning as opposed to what, the kidney-based learning? I mean, what are you talking about?
They
This
know
is
how to package some stuff with language, don't they,
you just
child?
take them out of somebody's mouth. They are not on the road to equity because what it tells you is they have glommed onto strategies over students. So rather than coaching students to be their best learner self, right? Teachers becoming the coach of students' learning capacity. What you hear is, oh, just give me these brain-based strategies, right? The thing we need to understand is how the brain actually learns things, and this is our stock and trade, but this is not what teacher education focuses on. We all get one course with Piaget and Skinner and Dewey, and these are the
Mhm.
philosophies of education, but we don't get cognitive and social neuroscience. And we have to start understanding this. And this is why I love the science of learning. I've always led with it. And now it is more codified. So it's easy for us to understand. The
Mm.
Sold Alliance, and people can Google that, soldalliance.org, has summarized a lot of this research and have come up with 8 elements of when the brain is learning, it is doing some combination of something relational, the emotional aspects, and the cognitive aspects of turning inert information, facts and figures that have no relevance, into usable knowledge, which has meaning. And it's a 3 that I pull out. One is malleability, that the brain can grow itself, it can change, and has this thing called neuroplasticity. The second is what we call integration or intersectionality, that all learning involves an emotional component, a social component, and a cognitive component. So you can't just, silo them. We can't have 15 minutes of social emotional learning and then we go ignore it when we're in the midst of the cognitive work. That
Mhm.
emotion is during when we're doing the cognitive meaning making. And if we don't help students understand and manage and self-regulate that, then they disengage. It becomes
Mhm.
overwhelming. There's too much cortisol in the brain. Their self-talk talks them out of powerful risk taking in learning. So we need to help them understand what productive struggle looks like, not just throw them in the deep end, right? But actually from first grade all the way up through elementary into middle school, develop this capacity so they leverage it in high school. If we try to teach it for the first time in high school, it's too late. That triage
Okay.
is heavy lifting. You need to come very, very well developed in your pedagogy in order to help students shift
Mhm.
by ninth, 10th grade. But the third one I want to talk about is meaning making, that the brain is a meaning making organ. It needs to figure out patterns and puzzles and like why. And the way that it does that is through information processing. It takes all the experiences, all the background knowledge, all the things and puts it in this network we call schema. And that is culturally organized. This is why culture becomes the software to the brain's hardware. That
Mhm.
schema then is organized. Now, when I'm learning new things, there have to be cognitive hooks, not superficial things, but this is how this is related to that thing you already know. And that is where the student does that. The teacher doesn't have to go in every student's head and does it, but a skillful teacher understands how to help students reach into that background knowledge and make connections to this new information, not just because it's relevant, but because it has meaning to them. This is a piece that people are under appreciating about what Dr. Ladson Billings talked about when she talked about academic prowess. She didn't necessarily name information processing, but what she's talking about is students' ability to do that meaning making through their own cultural lens and to widen their aperture so they can do it in other cultural contexts. Fisher and Fry call this learning transfer. Other cognitive scientists talk about this ability to go into different contexts, right? My ability to process information is going to serve me in social studies. It's going to serve me in physics. It's going to serve me in government and science class, because it is how the brain goes from taking things that are just, facts and figures irrelevant and making them relevant, connected, and meaningful.
I love that. And the reason why I love that is because, again, the way you just beautifully laid that out in those 3 points, I think any educator watching this can see pieces of that in their classroom, right? But the question is, are we connecting all of those things or leading with those things when we're understanding children?
But here's the thing I would also do and push us to say, it's not a matter of us just understanding. We're just a catalyst. We are a pass through. Is the student getting it? Because only the learner learns. If the learner ain't doing a new thing, you ain't taught it. You just covered something. You got your paycheck. That's good, but that ain't equity minded. So again, because I taught it doesn't mean the student learned it. If the student didn't learn it, you didn't teach it. You covered your content. 2 different things. And so my whole point is, a lot of teachers like, I do that, but is the student learning it? Yes. So we have to turn our focus and our inquiry to, how do we build our students' capacity? It's easier to build a student from kindergarten, 1st grade, all the way through. It's harder when we have allowed those learning gaps to grow, because now by 5th grade, the student believes they're just stupid.
Yes.
Or, Black folk don't do that, or Native folk don't engage in that kind of learning. So these are the narratives that are already out in the ether about Black and Brown and Indigenous children. And how then do we help students counter those narratives, right? So that they then can self-regulate and engage in that productive struggle. And there should be structures in the classroom. So any teacher listening, if you say, I already do that, I challenge you to do your own inquiry and push yourself. Am I doing it in a way that the student actually is making connection and sense? Somebody's writing, Karen M is writing, making connection and cognitive hooks are frowned upon in a system of compliance. Here's my point. If we're constantly thinking about what the system frowns upon and we're not closing our door, because how many times is the principal coming into your classroom? Really though? Close the damn door and do the damn thing.
The work.
That's not what the system is telling us what we can and can't do. Then that means adults have a system of compliance too. Liberatory educators are not worrying about compliance. I love the new book by Dr. Jarvis Givens.
Fugitive Pedagogy.
Right? Because this is the subversive act. Teaching is still a subversive act. Yeah, the system says do that, but I'm going to close my door and I'm going to make my children powerful learners. And then people going to start turning their attention like, damn, what you doing up in there? You hurting the babies?
You're right. And no consequences going to come for you by doing right by children.
Listen, if we waiting for the pacing guide, if we waiting for the leader to tell us and the system to tell us, then you're going to keep waiting.
Or
leads to nothing. And if you're waiting for your system to get on the equity train, that train's gone.
It's gone.
You need to get another mode of transportation.
To catch on up, child, and show me a teacher that's been fired because all their children left their class reading on grade level. Show me.
Listen, show me what it happened. Challenge the system from the bottom up. I think that the mistake we make is trying to go at it straight on. Listen, white supremacy culture and the use of schooling as a reproductive mechanism is a beast. We're not going to just roll up on it. We're going to have to be like the Trojan horse. You're going to have to come around the back. You're going to have to find that little small weakness, right?
That's right.
And the weakness is the instructional core. Because we're talking about all this other stuff. You know what? If I teach you to read, they can't never take you that away from you. Enslaved people taught each other to read with sticks and dirt. What we waiting on? We can still do that. I don't need the system permission to be liberatory in my instruction.
I know that's right. Listen, tell them at the base of it, right? And I think that the fire that you have, I think that some people feel stuck. They feel stuck. You can't feel stuck because when you're stuck, this is at the hands of children not learning. This is at the hands of people dying. Like you can't feel stuck.
That's right.
In your craft.
This is why we have to squad up. This is why I started the
Why?
online
Oh,
PLC. This is why we bring folks together. Why? Because to level up your pedagogy, people are doing book studies on my books. Listen, information ain't transformation. Because what
that's
people
right.
do is they read the book and then they go strategy strip it. They say, oh,
Yes.
I do that. Oh, that's a nice strategy. This ain't a smorgasbord and we picking the, olives and the cheeses. This is an algorithm where everything works together. One small piece doesn't work in your car ain't moving.
Yep. And I appreciate that you lifted that up that way because people are making millions and billions of dollars of stripping strategies. There's a
And, and we're,
training,
and we're
but
we're we're eating it up.
we
We're
are.
drinking Kool-Aid.
We
Stop.
are.
Put the big
Listen,
gulp down.
but this got me I got two questions coming off the heels of that. We're eating it up. I really would like because again, most of my audience is black. That's who we are. We are black educators. We are building the black educator pipeline. But why is culturally responsive teaching important for black teachers too? And how does it apply to them? Because many
Right.
times, like, I'm black. I don't need that. They ain't talking to me.
Right. Right. So this is that's such a good, rich question. If we believe the deficit orientation around how people are situating culturally responsive teaching, right, then it is this fix for Black and brown kids. And if you're Black or brown, you're in front of the kids, so you already know how to be culturally responsive. So there's some truth to that, but the main thing that we're not doing for Black teachers is building that capacity to understand the science of learning. And that idea of actually restoring academic prowess, because again, we're the first, last hired, first fired. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's a way in which our own compliance around fitting into the school, not being called out on simple things that other educators, white educators, aren't called out on. This is why we do have to figure out how to be powerfully subversive in plain sight.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Right? So this idea that how are we learning about the cognitive work, not just the relational, right? We may have that. We may have an edge there. And the fact is that we are not a monolith. There are different kinds of Black experiences in the world.
Yes.
They all should be lifted up. There is intersectionality between being Latinx and of African descent. There is a synergy with indigenous cultures and how those intersectionalities in our common experience around colonialism and genocide
Exactly.
bring us a shared experience. But
Mm-hmm.
here's the thing. We as Black educators have to lean into the science of learning. We have to understand, how do I coach my student to be a better, more powerful learner? And what does that mean for me? So there's something I have to learn, but it's not just me learning information. I now have to be in conversation and a learning partnership with my student. That's where I talk about an alliance, that we are both up to something liberatory. And I am clear when I'm working with my students, that is what we're up to. Like, I'm not trying to hide the vegetables and make you do some stuff you don't know why I'm doing. It's like, no, I'm telling you the truth about it. Now,
Mm-hmm.
the fact is, now we have to do that work, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. Students are going to, once we start learning anything, we're not good at it at first. And
Mm-hmm.
too often we abandon it. As teachers, we abandon, well, the kids I can't get them to talk in groups. Well, it's going to be messy in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you do that? What are the mechanisms so that you move them through the messy, chaotic part of it? How are you engaging them so that they are being the leaders of their own learning? That's a whole piece they don't keep.
The leaders and the
And,
masters of their
and they
own
keep
learning.
that from us. And that's where we as educators need to be getting together to do that work.
Yes. And I love and how all of this, you are putting the onus back on the teachers, but not in a blame fest kind of way.
Right.
Not in a blame fest kind of way. It's more of be the master and be the owner of your own craft. Stop waiting for folks to give you something. Stop waiting for folks to give you this magic pill to be able to just to teach kids and turn minds on when there's a science of learning that exists. And again, understanding your own power, especially for Black teachers, your own power and your own history and legacy of leading and teaching young people. So I love how you flip it and put it back and put the onus on teachers, which brings
Yes.
me to the other thing that when you was talking that got me hype is you talk a lot about being equity minded and being an equity minded educator. but I'm not sure if people really understand what that means. What
Yeah.
does it mean to be an equity-minded educator?
I think it is, it's the primary condition that puts you in the position to build toward being an abolitionist teacher, right? So we talk about that, but that means I'm conscious of my ability to use pedagogy to move students forward. I am conscious and understanding how the system wants to keep us stuck, how it will underdevelop them, how I can counter it in ways that are uh, easy for me and not about me battling the school board or my
Mhm,
principal or the, you know what I mean? Because I got to keep my own peace. You got to keep your own
mhm,
well-being and anchor. You've got to be able to not burn yourself out raging against the system, right? So
mhm,
that's the first piece. I think the other piece is our racial literacy is too low. Too many folks in their own local area don't understand how what the apartheid conditions were that have created the conditions that they're
current, yeah,
currently seeing.
current system.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, Dr. Joyce King talks about her work is really powerful, and you know, more of us should be reading it. She talks about this idea of uh, disconscious racism, meaning, you know, we have this kind of amnesia about it. Now we know the high points, but we don't know how it's enacting itself in the local context, particularly when we start talking about underdeveloping cognitive capacity. Like that sounds cool as hell to say, but you need to know actually how it works so that an equity minded educator has a lens that is tuned to being anti-racist because it understands how the system works. It just has an understanding. That's where
Mhm.
that racial literacy. We understand the narratives. This is how those narratives are playing out in this context. We understand the historical timeline. We understand how all those things are working.
I
But
think that's big.
here's the other part to it. You also have a cultural lens that is open. So you have a bicultural, if not a tricultural lens. And think about it like glasses, two different lenses that bring an image together.
Mhm. 'Cause I definitely got astigmatism in both eyes, but they work together to
We
make
work
sure
together.
I'm seeing straight and clear.
Right. I
But
hear
the
too many. Here's the last piece I'll say.
Yep.
I see too many folks that lean heavily on the anti-racist stuff, and then that's what it's all about. So that they don't know how to build a bridge to the instructional stuff. All they get training around is anti-racism, anti-bias, and social justice themes in the curriculum, but they don't know how to make students more powerful learners.
Well, here's my struggle with like even talking about anti-racism, anti-bias. Again, those are one of those buzzwords.
That's
It's also performative. Like people will say I'm anti-racist just so they're not seen as racist in a sense. When and underneath all that is like, but are you really doing the work? Um, and I think that we get very caught up in being anti-racist, anti-bias, culturally responsive training. We need a diversity and equity committee. We get so caught up in those things
yeah,
as if those are the only things that are limiting the education possibilities for children. You can be as anti-racist as you want. If you can't teach, they aren't going to learn. And I think that that message gets drowned out by, am I racist or am I not? Yes, your racist practices are prohibiting you from seeing that the science of learning works on any child. Like when
yeah,
people connect that, right? Like they don't connect that. Like, yes, we have to deal with your bias, we have to deal with your racism, because that is what is even prohibiting you from acknowledging that there is a science of learning. That is what is prohibiting you from putting the onus on you as an educator. That is your job to help children unlock their potential. That's why we need to get rid of that.
yeah.
But once we go through all of those trainings, there needs to be real quality instructional coaching to help support teachers
Ooh.
on things like the science of learning. There
All
needs
right.
to be
So let's stop right there. Woo, girl, you said a lot, right?
yeah,
But let's see. This is why I think instructional coaches are the linchpin because they don't have that strategic knowledge, and they're supposed to be put in classrooms to help teachers with the culturally responsive. It's the blind leading the blind.
it
What do they
is
know?
divine.
And let's turn down the volume on the words and let it be about the work. And so
Mm-hmm.
again, if you have a classroom where you have a number of children who are underperforming in reading proficiency, stop with the words, start doing some inquiry around how do I build their capacity to be powerful learners. So now your actions will couple your words, your
Mm-hmm.
work, right? Faith without works is dead. If I just say I'm anti-racist, right, being hopeful around that, but if not doing the work of translating that to interrupting the way cognition is underdeveloped, then I can't say that I'm actually working that out.
I can't. I can't. You're exactly right. Faith without the works. Stop saying it and let's do it. I think that's major. But I love again how you're like lifting that all up. Um, the other thing I would love to get into, because we mentioned it a lot here, and I've had previous shows about this, but I would love to hear your own kind of words. What do you mean when you say liberatory education? Like, what does liberatory education mean to you?
Yes. I go back to my own schooling experience that I was, my mother created her own busing program, right? She
Mm,
lied about our address and
okay.
sent us to a predominantly white class, school. I mean, thinking we were going to get a better quality of education. Of course, I was from the hood, and you take the
Yep.
girl out of the hood, but you know what the saying is: the hood went to
Yeah.
school with me, and
Hello. All right.
that was not appreciated. But I was smart as hell because that's what my mother had. I knew stuff, I knew how to learn. I was engaged in the learning. But because of the way I showed up, my cultural way of being, they were trying to put a blanket on that, and I
Mm,
pushed back hard. Sometimes had to go before the Board of Education twice,
mm,
for expulsion. But I had teachers who believed in me, who actually came down and advocated for me because they knew that wasn't who I was. My personhood was being challenged, and I just bowed back up. And
love
so,
that.
I learned a thing or two about calming that down. But the thing I also learned was, because I knew how to learn, I was free. I wasn't controlled by who withheld information from me, or if I didn't understand something, that teacher wasn't the only source I had to go through. Liberatory education is again about students being the leaders of their own learning, not just in the classroom, but in the learning ecosystem. They're going to learn stuff all over. I was the oldest granddaughter. I had to learn how to be the sous chef to my grandmother. When my grandmother got too old, when she was cleaning houses still, I had to learn how to help her manage her business and actually do some of that labor with her. Liberatory education is where you have choices because your capacities are developed. And that meaning making part of our brain knows how to continue to grow itself. It knows when
Mhm.
it's confused, it doesn't freak out, knows how to move out of confusion, how to get itself unstuck. This was something that I had to teach my writing students. Like, they kept making the same mistakes. There wasn't enough red pen to help them understand that comma splice. And it wasn't a matter of me repeating it. It was a matter of me helping them see that they could start to see their own mistakes and correct them, that mistakes were information. A liberatory education helps you leverage your ability to process the information that's coming in, situate it in a social context. You ain't just taking everything at face value. Critical
Right.
awareness,
Yeah.
critical literacy, right?
Yeah.
That is what we owe our children, particularly Black and Brown children, if they are to navigate this world, because that system is not coming down tomorrow. We might be chipping away at it. They are still
Mhm.
going to, those fifth graders are still going to have to navigate some stuff, right?
Yep.
So I really think for children, it is getting that ability to be a cognitively independent learner. For educators, is knowing that's what your charge is,
Yep.
right? So
To really
knowing
move.
that you have to be John the Baptist, children of Jesus. John the Baptist came to make a way.
Baptize Jesus. You know what I'm saying? Show him a
That's
way.
right. That's
You're
right.
right.
You are the pass through. You are the coach that Serena Williams hires. You ain't out there
Talk about
coaching.
it. Talk
You
about it.
ain't hitting the tennis ball, but you are helping her level up her game. You're the
Right.
Olympic champion coach. You may not have your own gold medal, but you got the recipe to help them level up and exploit their potential. That's
Yeah.
what we're talking about. Not blowing smoke up an orifice, but to actually give them the tools and be side by side, shoulder by shoulder, helping them with feedback, leveling them up, giving them that warm demander stance. And see, a lot of people treat the warm demander just like they treat anti-racist. I'm a warm demander. Are you really?
But
Are
you're
you?
not.
You're
But you're
not.
not.
You're
You're
not
not.
because your children are behind. You
Yep.
can't be a warm demander. Warm demander doesn't mean warm strict or some of this other stuff folks out there being, saying. I won't even name names because I'm about to go there, but I will not. So the reality is we can't just be saying these things. It's common for us to do that, and that's a pedagogy of compliance. A warm demander has that active demandingness of a coach. I'm here with you. I'm going to give you that feedback so you can level up. We're going to step back and analyze. We're going to look at the game tape together. My son was a football player. He'd always been like, I'm like, what are you doing in there? I'm looking at the game tape, Mom. What y'all learning from the game tape? And I learned from him that that's how I get better.
Yeah. My
Right?
son's an athlete too. We watch film with him.
This
Gotta
is the
watch
only area where we don't use those same skills of what does
techniques.
it mean to improve.
Agree. Or it's only or same area where again you can call yourself warm and strict and people glorify you, or well, her class, they're super compliant and the kids like her. Are they reading when they leave? Then what was all that warm strictness for? Just the child just to survive,
Well,
not to have a class that's on fire. And that is
well,
the problem there, because we cannot
that's right.
expect the bare minimum from our children. They're
That's right.
they're beyond just not having the classroom on fire. They're beyond that. Again,
That's
like I love the example that you made about Jesus and John the Baptist, right? Because they are geniuses. And I know people say like that's the buzzword, right? But no, they really are. And it's your job to help unlock the key to their potential. But again, when you already have a deficit of not seeing brown and black children in that way, you already come in the classroom stepping
that's
wrong.
right.
You
That's right.
already coming in stepping wrong.
And you give them low-level tasks that don't grow their brain power. Here's the thing we know from athlete development, from becoming a concert level pianist, any other award-winning artist, that requires pushing beyond the zone into the zone of proximal development, meaning to your growing edge. And nobody likes to go there. We can't, but Lev Vygotsky said this, that we can't go there by ourselves. We need someone to pull us into that. But you need a relationship. I need to trust that you got me. And that's
Mhm.
what warm strict is about. It's not about the strict. It's about the I got you, and we're gonna level up.
But you already made that comments about blowing smoke up the orifice, right? So meaning when we talking about trust and we talking about relationships, I know when you're not keeping it real for me. And when you're
That's right.
talking about students in the black and the brown community and talking about culturally responsiveness, all of that, it starts with trust. But I know when it's
That's right.
BS. I'm very clear on what is BS.
That's right.
And I think
Here's
that's
the thing. There's a question out here. How do I pull out the genius within my Black students? I said this is, again, we have to really caution because the word genius is now being applied like the word scholar, right? Not Gloria Ladson Billings, but Goldie Muhammad. Brilliant work, right? Cultivating genius. In many ways, she is saying the same thing. Our students have genius, but we don't pull it out of them.
Mm-hmm.
The word she's using is cultivate. You cultivate it. This is the malleability of the brain. The brain will grow into its fullest capacity when we cultivate it. So the reality is we don't pull genius out of kids. We don't plant seeds and just pull it out. We let the seed emerge because we're nurturing it. We're watering it. We've given it the right sun. It is what it wants to do anyway. So the way in which we get that genius to blossom, the cultivation we have to do is to improve the information processing skills.
Yes.
So this is something that is really a different orientation. We have to be able to get the right circumstances so that kids can grow their own intelligence. Only the learner learns.
That's why cultivating is saying that and putting that with genius is super, super important.
Super
So
important.
we are going to get into our Thank a Black Teacher segment. I know people are like, what Black teacher she want to thank? But we're going to get into it right now. So what Black teachers or Black teacher do you want to thank today?
Well, I have two. The first one is Miss Morris. Miss Morris was my fifth grade teacher at Lafayette Elementary in San Francisco, California. She was the only Black teacher in a predominantly white school. We were, a gaggle of Black kids, my brother, my sister, myself, and a few other Black kids in this predominantly white school. And she really would kind of pull us aside, not so much and say, hey, you have to edit yourself or behave this way, but she was always like, you need to develop your intelligence and manage yourself in a way. Because I was just like, and she was like, snatch me up. Miss Morris was like, she was a demand, Warren demanded, she was the demanding part of that. But I appreciate her because what she was also pointing out was you have potential. She always started that with, girl, you have got it. You need to cultivate it. You need to rein it in. You need to develop it. So she was always on me in a way that I'm like, Miss Morris, but I love her. I love her because she challenged me to do better. She challenged me to level up and to step into my genius. And I have always been appreciative of her. She wasn't warm and fuzzy. That wasn't her. Mr. Hudson was the second one. He's my 10th grade teacher. And actually, I don't even know if I actually had Mr. Hudson for anything. But, I'm roaming the halls, doing my thing, trying to be social. Mr. Hudson, he was the warm part of that because he was like very relational, but he'd also give me the side eye like, girl, you don't belong out these halls. I'm like, yes, you do. So I love that both of them were able to be their authentic selves, understand the liberatory nature of education, be subversive in their own way. They were actually expressing that fugitive pedagogy, that I can see something better for you. Let me give you a little direction, because these folks don't care if you crash and burn. I do.
Well, shout out to both of those people who have been a major impact and a major influence on your life. In this space, we want to give people their flowers and let them know that the impact that they've had on us. We don't have a bunch of time to get into it, but just the impact of like Miss Quinta Brunson and her show Abbott Elementary, and that being inspired by one teacher, and her experience with that one teacher, right? It's
that's a whole nother conversation, right?
Yes, it is. I'm gonna have to do a show around that, but it's super amazing to know that how you impact the lives of young people and how they carry those moments and those things with them.
That's
and
right.
What you said just immensely described that. I want to spend like a minute 30 seconds because I good for people to hear this on this, because I know we about to wrap up in a minute. But we are in the times of the pandemic right now, like we just are. And what opportunities do you see for folks right now to be able to reimagine education as we know it?
First we got to stop using the word reimagine. If I hear that one more time, and take a pen and take my own eye out. It's just rhetoric right now. So the fact is, be about the business. Do the damn thing. Help kids learn in any ecosystem that they are in. That's the best thing we can do. I wrote an article, Liberatory Education, this past summer for American Teacher. You can Google it. And I really talk about and try to unpack how we can leverage the pandemic as an opportunity to reimagine what instruction looks like, not just better distance instruction, but again, preparing students to be powerful learners. The pandemic has just pulled back the curtain that we have not done that. And we still have to. That's our educational debt that Dr. Ladson Billings talked about. That's where our social responsibility is. We need to help every student become a powerful learner. So leverage the opportunity that the pandemic has set before us, right? The obstacle is the way. And the way to do that is to engage students, see where those learning gaps are, help the student buy in, lean into that learning, and help them move through that information processing. And if you don't know what that is, rather than just going out making stuff up, learn about it, right? Squad up with some folks. If your district isn't offering that, offer it to yourself.
Yes.
Because they are not going to bring liberatory education to your next PD. Ain't coming.
It ain't there. Okay. You got to learn how to access that info on your own. Oh my God. Thank you for being with us today. This has been, of course, a fire conversation. So much information given, so much energy given, but on top of that, so much inspiration. You are definitely super inspiring and know how to light a fire under the people. So
Well,
we
I
thank
just
you.
appreciate all the teachers out there holding it down. They still doing the damn thing. They're in there with the children in the trenches. So the rest of us need to shut.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. I generally give my folks, that's a final word that you want to say to the guests out there.
And
So
that is my final word is we need to lift up teachers, love on a Black teacher, love on each other, and share some knowledge. Push yourself to say, I think I'm doing that. Am I doing that? And, use video, use audio, just build your capacity and don't do it by yourself. We're better together.
shout out, squad up. Well, thank you everybody for coming to watch and join us today. We will be back next week, same place, same time. And Miss Hammond, we appreciate you being with us today. So see you next week, everybody. Peace.